Hi, and welcome to The Lowest Crime, where we explore some of the most fascinating and disturbing criminal cases from the Netherlands. I am Eline, and today we'll dive into a case that captivated the public and ended in a tragic miscarriage of justice. We're going to unravel the story of Lucia de Berk, or as she became known in the media, Lucia de B. Please note that today's episode includes descriptions of sensitive topics such as death, and therefore may be disturbing to some listeners. And as always, I try my best to bring you all the known facts, but I am just an amateur podcast creator, so there is always a chance of me making a mistake. Let's dive in. Lucia de Berk was born in 1961, a woman who, by all accounts, led an ordinary life as a nurse. Throughout her career, she worked in various hospitals across the Netherlands, including the Juliana Children's Hospital, JKZ, in Den Haag. Those who knew her described her as quiet, kind, and deeply dedicated to her patients. She was the sort of person who slipped into the background, quietly working, caring for patients, and living her life without drawing much attention to herself. Despite her professional reputation, Lucia's social life was not without hardship. Although Lucia is Dutch, as a child she lived in Canada for a while, and there her family faced a traumatic event when a fire destroyed her family home in the early 1970s. Lucia hadn't been home when the fire broke out, and authorities ruled it as an accidental electrical fault. But the emotional scars lingered long after the fire, shaping parts of her life that would later come under scrutiny. Lucia's interests outside of work were modest and private. She enjoyed reading thrillers, especially by Stephen King, and had a deep interest in alternative spiritual practices such as tarot reading, which she used as a way to manage her stress. She wasn't someone who sought attention, and few could have predicted the media storm that would soon engulf her life. In 2001, while working at the Juliana Children's Hospital, a sudden and unexpected event occurred that would thrust her into the center of a criminal investigation. A baby under her care died unexpectedly. At first, it was viewed as a tragic but natural event, the kind of heartbreaking incident that sometimes just happens in hospitals. But soon, Lucia's calm, unassuming demeanor became the source of suspicion. Doubts about Lucia de Berk began when hospital administrators noticed her involvement in a suspiciously large number of unexplained deaths. The pattern was too striking to ignore, turning what seemed like tragic events into something far more sinister. On September 4th, 2001, the hospital officially reported to the police, suggesting unnatural causes behind the baby's death. This launched an intense investigation, revealing that Lucia had been present at numerous patient resuscitations and other unexplained deaths, deepening the suspicion surrounding her. Within weeks, the police were investigating not just that one unexplained death, but several others. The cases ranged across different hospitals where Lucia had worked, including the Leyenburg Hospital, Rode Kruis Ziekenhuis, and the PEN Hospital. At each hospital, administrators combed through patient records, trying to identify any other unexplained deaths or resuscitations during her shifts. In the Juliana Children's Hospital alone, between the years 2000 and 2001, 9 such cases came to light. The connection seemed clear. In almost every instance, Lucia had been present. Colleagues who had once viewed her as an efficient, hard-working nurse now found themselves questioning her behavior. She was calm, too calm, they thought. Some staff members began to speak up, hinting at their growing discomfort around her. By mid-September, the hospital's director, Paul Smits, called a press conference, publicly confirming that a nurse was under investigation for involvement in multiple patient deaths. Although Lucia's name had not been mentioned officially, rumors began to spread like wildfire. The media latched onto the story, with news outlets running headlines about the possibility of a killer nurse at large. The public was horrified by the idea, and it wasn't long before Lucia de B became a household name across the Netherlands. Before long, what had started as a review of a few unexplained deaths snowballed into a massive criminal investigation encompassing 30 cases of patient deaths and resuscitations. Although many of these cases were quickly dismissed as natural deaths, the pattern of suspicion followed Lucia wherever she had worked. The overwhelming question lingered: how could one nurse be present at so many unexplained deaths? This cannot be a coincidence. Even more chilling, the police began delving into Lucia's family history. They unearthed the tragic house fire in Canada, but investigators began to speculate that perhaps this event had been more than an accident. Perhaps it revealed something much darker about her, though nothing could be proven. The media spun the story into a narrative: a woman who had always been surrounded by death. In December 2001, Lucia was arrested under highly stressful circumstances. At the time, she was at the bedside of her grandfather, caring for him in his final days. However, an intercepted phone call between Lucia and her mother raised alarming concerns. During the call, Lucia was overheard saying that she had to administer some medicine. With the suspicion being that Lucia poisoned her patients, the police couldn't wait any longer and arrested her on the spot. During her arrest, she muttered, "Why can't I finish this?" A statement that the authorities interpreted as her wanting to finish her own grandfather, adding weight to the growing evidence against her. Lucia de Berk's trial began in 2002 and quickly became one of the most sensational trials in Dutch history. The prosecution's case was simple but devastating. They argued that Lucia had murdered at least 7 patients and attempted to kill 3 others. The crux of the argument rested on 2 key points: statistical improbability and toxicology evidence. The prosecution's most powerful argument hinged on a striking piece of statistical evidence. An expert testified that the odds of Lucia being present at so many deaths purely by chance were 1 in 7 billion. This staggering figure sent shockwaves through both the public and the judge. The idea that so many deaths could occur naturally, all under the watch of a single nurse, seemed beyond belief. It defied common sense. The prosecution seized on this number, making it the cornerstone of their case. And as it echoed through the media, it cemented the growing perception that Lucia's guilt was undeniable. The prosecution also introduced a diary found at Lucia's home, which they claimed contained incriminating evidence. In the diary, Lucia had written about a great secret and compulsive tendencies. The prosecution interpreted these writings as evidence that Lucia had a compulsion to kill. To the public, it was damning. To the court, it seemed irrefutable. Lucia, however, insisted that her diary entries referred to her spiritual practices, her tarot readings, her private way to cope with stress, and nothing more. But the toxicology evidence was equally damning. The experts testified that traces of digoxin, a drug used to treat heart conditions, were found in the bodies of 2 deceased children. In large doses, digoxin can be fatal, and the prosecution argued that Lucia had deliberately administered it to kill them. This toxicology report, too, became a crucial piece of evidence in the prosecution's case. The defense, however, argued that the toxicology results were inconclusive and that the digoxin levels could have naturally occurred. They pointed out that no one had actually seen Lucia administer the drug, and no one had witnessed her harm any patients. But the weight of the statistical evidence combined with the emotional power of the toxicology reports and the diary was overwhelming. In 2003, after a highly publicized trial, Lucia de B was found guilty of 4 murders and 3 attempted murders. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, as well as a compulsory psychiatric treatment, TBS. The sentence was unusually harsh, reflecting not just the severity of the crimes that she was accused of, but also the belief that she was mentally unstable, a disturbing combination that confirmed her as a dangerous and calculated serial killer. Justice had been served. Lucia de B was found guilty, and finally the hospitals were safe again. Despite the overwhelming public perception of guilt, there were those that began to doubt the fairness of Lucia's conviction. One of the first to raise concerns was Dr. Meta de No, a physician who had followed the case closely. She and her brother, philosopher Ton Derksen, believed that Lucia had been the victim of a grave miscarriage of justice. Together, they began to investigate the case, focusing particularly on the statistical evidence that had played such a significant role in the conviction. In 2005, the siblings published a book titled Lucia de B, reconstructie van een gerechtelijke dwaling. Lucia de B, reconstruction of a judicial error, which argued that the statistical analysis used to convict Lucia was fundamentally flawed. According to Derksen, the prosecution had grossly misrepresented the odds of Lucia being present at the deaths by chance. The 1 in 7 billion figure, he argued, was not only misleading but wrong. Derksen pointed out that in a hospital setting, deaths were not uncommon, particularly among critically ill patients. The idea that it was impossible for a nurse to be present during multiple deaths was based on faulty logic. After all, nurses who work with very ill patients are more likely to witness deaths than those who work with less critical cases. The statistical evidence, which had seemed so damning during the trial, began to fall apart under scrutiny. The toxicology evidence also came under question. The defense had argued during the trial that the digoxin levels found in the patients' bodies could have been naturally occurring, and new expert analysis supported this. There was no definite proof that the children had been poisoned. The public, once so certain of Lucia's guilt, began to slowly shift as these seeds of doubts took root. Investigative journalists started to question the integrity of the prosecution's case, and slowly but surely, public opinion began to change. By 2006, the doubts surrounding Lucia's conviction had grown too large to ignore. Ton Derksen and others submitted a request to the Committee for the Evaluation of Closed Criminal Cases, CEAS, asking for Lucia's case to be reopened. CEAS, which was responsible for reviewing potential miscarriages of justice, took the case seriously. After a lengthy review process, the committee recommended that Lucia's case be reopened, citing serious concerns about the evidence used to convict her. The most critical piece of evidence was the toxicology report. New tests were conducted, and they revealed that the digoxin levels in the patient's body were not, in fact, abnormally high. Experts concluded that there was no definite proof that the patients had been poisoned at all, despite what the prosecution had claimed during the trial. In 2008, the Dutch Supreme Court ordered that Lucia's case be reopened. The court acknowledged that the original trial had relied on flawed evidence, and that there were now serious doubts about Lucia's guilt. The case was referred to the Court of Appeal in Arnhem for a full retrial. During the retrial, independent experts reviewed the medical records of the patients who had died under Lucia's care. They concluded that all of the patients had died of natural causes. There was no evidence to suggest that they had been murdered. The experts also reviewed the statistical evidence and found that it had been misused during the original trial. On March 17, 2010, the prosecution announced that they would not be seeking a new conviction, and instead called for Lucia's full acquittal. They acknowledged that the evidence against her was unsustainable and that she had been wrongfully convicted. On April 14, 2010, nearly 9 years after her nightmare began, Lucia de Berk was finally acquitted of all charges. The court ruled that the deaths of the patients had been natural and that there was no proof of any wrongdoing on Lucia's part. The judges also criticized the original investigation, noting that there had been a rush to judgment and that the crucial evidence had been misrepresented. Lucia de Berk's acquittal marked the end of a long and painful chapter in her life, but the scars of her wrongful conviction would remain with her forever. she had spent nearly 7 years in prison for crimes that she did not commit, and the toll on her mental and physical health was immense. While incarcerated, Lucia suffered a stroke, which left her with lasting health problems. Even though she had been cleared of all charges, the years of imprisonment and the public vilification she endured could not be easily undone. Lucia received compensation from the Dutch government for her wrongful imprisonment, though the exact number was never made public. Her former employer, one of the hospitals, also paid her damages for the emotional and professional harm she had suffered as a result of the wrongful conviction. In addition to financial compensation, Lucia received a letter of apology from the Dutch Minister of Justice. In the letter, the minister expressed his deep regret for the miscarriage of justice, describing Lucia's case as chilling and acknowledging the profound harm that had been done to her. Despite these apologies, no one involved in the investigation or prosecution of Lucia's case faced any official consequences for their role in her wrongful conviction. The hospital staff who had raised suspicions, the police officers who had arrested her, and the legal professionals who had prosecuted her were never held accountable for the mistakes they had made. After her release, Lucia largely avoided the public eye. The trauma of everything had left her wary of the media, which had played a huge role in her public vilification. In 2003, the Dutch media had widely portrayed her as a monstrous figure. Headlines focused on her alleged crimes as a serial killer, responsible for multiple deaths in hospitals, with headlines like "Nurse of Death," and emphasizing on the statistical improbability of her innocence. The media also sensationalized the psychological aspect, implying that she had acted on dark impulses. This portrayal had reinforced her image as a malevolent and dangerous person who posed a significant threat to vulnerable patients in her care. It had been a true trial by media, villainizing her even before her actual conviction. In 2014, Lucia's story was turned into a feature film called Lucia de B. The film played an important role in keeping Lucia's story alive and ensuring that her case would not be forgotten. The case of Lucia de Berk remains one of the most significant miscarriages of justice in Dutch legal history. It serves as a powerful reminder of the dangers of tunnel vision in criminal investigations and the misuse of statistical evidence. The case also highlighted the importance of independent expert reviews in the justice system. Had it not been for the efforts of individuals like Ton Derksen and Meta de Noo, Lucia might have never been exonerated. Their determination to uncover the truth and their willingness to challenge the prevailing narrative were instrumental in bringing about justice. And for now, that concludes this episode. Thank you so much for listening. Be sure to subscribe and leave a review. And don't forget to follow The Lowest Crime on Instagram to find all images related to the case. I look forward to seeing you in the next one.